Hi. Today we are starting a new series about communion. Call it also Holy Communion. Communion between God and us, between God and people, human beings. Now, we want to understand what is communion. We know about union, and a group of people united with same purpose. For example, a party, or what we call union, that's people that defend the rights of the workers, for example. And communion is coming together in union, is having the same mind, the same purpose, being one. And this describes what God desires above all. After creating Adam and Eve, the first thing he explained to them and worked it was that he wanted a communion between them and him. And that's what we see in Genesis before the disobedience and the fall. That Jesus, God, were walking with Adam and Eve in the garden, sharing at nightfall, in the cool of the breeze of the evening. And ever since the fall, God has been trying to reconcile, to bring reconciliation between God and man, between himself and us. And he instituted a way of communion with him, as we can see in Deuteronomy, where there was mention of sacrifices of communion. It was actually food and drink that people would bring to the temple and eat in God's presence with rejoicing. But ever before, we see the first communion described in Genesis chapter 14. At that point, Abram had just finished fighting to recover and rescue his nephew Lot that had been abducted with people from Sodom. You know, he had parted ways with Abram and went on to stay in Sodom because the place was lush and green and beautiful, and he decided to take his quarters there. And unfortunately, the place was attacked, he was abducted. When Abram was informed, he didn't hesitate. He brought as many people as he could on his side and went to fight those kings that had abducted Lot, and recovered everything and recovered everybody, including his nephew and family. And as he was coming back, we are told that Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of the high God, and blessed him, saying, "Blessed be Abram by the high God, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed be the high God who handed your enemies over to you." Abram gave him a tenth of all the recovered plunder. And that Melchizedek is somebody that doesn't get mentioned again in the whole of the Old Testament until the letter of Hebrews, chapter 7, where a whole chapter is explaining who was that Melchizedek, the king of Salem. That Salem is Salam, Shalom, is the king of peace. And we know that this was not just an ordinary king. First of all, because of what he did, he brought out of his own bread and wine, and he shared it with Abram. It was like an after-fight restoration, where he gave his own bread and wine, he gave himself. It was a figure of Jesus Christ that gave himself to his disciples. Here, Melchizedek gave bread and wine to Abram. It was a sharing, a communion, the first of all communions. And Abram recognized him as higher he responded to the blessing by giving Melchizedek a tenth of all he had recovered from the plunder. And that was the first tithing. We now give a tenth of what we receive or what we harvest, of what we get to God as a thanksgiving, as a recognition that He is the owner of heaven and earth, including us and everything we have. So it's a recognition. And that's what Abram did. And we did in the loins of Abram, because we are the children of Abraham by faith. And so we see that this was the first communion. And to Abraham, it changed his life. It gave him a stamp of knowing that God was there to sustain him. It gave him strength. It empowered him. And later he was able to have a child after many years of childlessness. That communion became a blessing, not only mental, spiritual, but even physical. It restored his strength after the battle. And that's what God wants us to do and receive from Him. And I invite you to go back to those two chapters, Genesis 14 and Hebrews 7, and appreciate what communion is. Not just a ceremony or something that started in the New Testament. No, something that was initiated right from the start, right from Genesis, by God Himself. Bread and wine shared out for us. Bless you.